Okay, I think so far we've had, what, 3, 4 Swedish coffee breaks or something? Is that right? So I'm really kind of excited about the idea, and I think I'm going to take it home with me. But thanks for everyone who's come. Especially thanks to the woman in the front who helped me find the coffee bar earlier this morning. That was tremendously helpful after my morning flight from Amsterdam. So it's good to be here. My name is David Stephenson. And what this talk is about is it's going to be talking about how we built a real-time streaming recommendation engine for an e-commerce site with Neo4j and incorporating some streaming properties. We did it in 2 weeks with 4 people, and I'm going to talk about how we did that. And most importantly, what I want to do in this talk is not just talk about the fact that Neo4j is useful for recommender engines, because we all know that. Okay, Peter talked about that earlier this afternoon, and it's a common use case for Neo4j. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but a little bit more I'm going to talk about how we came to choose Neo4j, and it's specifically how Neo4j became a part of a larger solution, of a way that we tried as quickly as possible to make an existing platform as data-driven and as analytically fueled as we could, maximizing the resources that we had available as quickly as possible and in an agile way. Okay, so a big theme of the talk is really how Neo4j fit into that bigger framework of quickly bringing analytic value to a company. Okay, to set the framework for that, I should introduce myself. So my name is David Stephenson. I'm from the United States. Have been living in the Netherlands for about 10 years. I did my PhD in mathematics and computer science in the US, and I've been working with a variety of different companies, a lot of finance and insurance companies, consulting, more recently at eBay, where I had a global role in analytics. I left eBay a couple years ago, and I've been doing independent consulting. And the reason that's especially interesting now is because what happened a few years ago is an ex-colleague of mine from eBay, now the CTO at a company called Belle Villa, and him and the CEO essentially brought me in to say, hey, can you launch a data initiative for us? You know, and I'll introduce the company to you. The company is Belle Villa. Belle Villa, it's well known in the Netherlands, on the continent, less so in the UK, but for those of you from other countries, it's a very familiar name. It's a company which has been around for over 30 years. So a very traditional company, which of course entered the internet age and had a website online and such, and wasn't doing a whole lot with data and analytics until about 2 years ago, when the majority share of Belle Villa was acquired by Axel Springer, okay, the large German publisher. And part of the initiative for Axel Springer was growth through acquisitions, but also organic growth through better use of data and analytics. Okay, so they made a strategic decision to say, we haven't been doing much with data and analytics so far. We want to very quickly start doing as much as we can in ways that bring immediate value. Okay, part of that was building up a team. So they had no team to start with. They had technology experts who were not data experts. Okay, so that was part of my role, is to come in, help them identify ways to utilize technology, and help build up a team. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind when we talk about the solution, why we chose the path we did, and in terms of the time frame. Okay, so Belle Villa is one of the largest online portals for vacation rentals, like holiday homes, vacation parks, that type of thing. You can think of it as sort of halfway between Airbnb and Hotels.com, right? So it's got about 500,000 properties, which are spread out in almost 40 different countries. So it has a pretty big footprint in terms of the properties. In terms of guests who use Belle Villa, every year, about 1.3 million people from 140 different properties book their holidays through Belle Villa. Okay, so it's pretty extensive, and you can tell through those numbers that there's a lot of diversity. Diversity in the customer base, and diversity in terms of what types of products they're offering. Okay, because you're looking at individually owned homes for the most part, like similar to Airbnb. So the idea is that your product is very diverse. Everything's a little bit different, okay, with the exception of some holiday parks where there's multiple versions. So that added a challenge then to the recommender engine. Okay, taking a step back though. Okay, so you take a step back, you come in as an external, they say, hey, we want to use data, we've got an open slate, we have a budget for it, what should we be doing with data and analytics, okay? So then, essentially what you start to do is you start to generate focus areas, okay? What's important to your business, what are your pain points, what are your strategic ambitions, where should we focus on with data and analytics? You develop focus areas, and then you start to say, explain to me in business terms what you want. Okay, so they'll say something like, we want more effective marketing to our customers. You know, we want to make sure we're understanding we're sending the right material to the right people, and that it's being effective and leading to sales. Okay, that's the business term. You translate that into some sort of data science term, which would be customer segmentation, marketing ROI, conversion rate, whatever. The sort of analytic terms which you won't necessarily use immediately with the business. Once you've done that, you're looking at your data, and then you're looking at your technology and your staffing, and that's where things get much more challenging, because then you have to look at the organization. You have to say what technology is in place, what's the appetite for change, what staffing is available, should I use externals, if so, who should I use? Okay, and that's where the challenge really was in this situation, and that's a little bit more of what I want to focus on. Okay, but the context of this, the context of the final Neo4j recommender engine was, hey, we've got a clean slate for our company, lots of options, what's the best solution among many solutions, not only in terms of technology, but also applications. And for me, and this was a project, like I said, I was external, but it spanned a whole year. So essentially I had 1 year to launch things out. So you start to do that and you build up a roadmap. This is my sort of semi-graph version of a Gantt chart. I should have done this in Neo4j, but this is actually what I used. Except it wasn't actually in Cyrillic, those of you in the front row. I had to randomize things for privacy purposes, so bear with me there. But essentially what this is meant to show is that as you're looking at applications, you're looking at milestones which span a long time period and have interdependencies, okay? So part of this Cyrillic chart you're seeing has to do with customer journey, and part of the customer journey milestones have to do with recommender systems. So you lay this out, we laid this out in the first month I was there. Now someone's gonna take a screenshot of this and go home and do like an algorithm and untranslate it and get me in big trouble. So that's fine with the screenshots, but don't decode it, please. Not that you could. Where was I? I was actually saying something meaningful for a minute. Right, so then you have to look at this and say, some of these are dependent on each other, some of these have to be done in short time frames. Which of these can we do effectively and in what stage? Okay. Now, if you look at the Belle Villa website, I want to motivate the recommender engine problem, because that was high on our priority list. Why is that? Okay. So we're looking at vacation rentals. It's not Airbnb where you're going away for a weekend and it's 10 times a year you need a room to stay in. These are typically 1, 2, 3 week bookings, which are major holiday events. So most of your customers are coming maybe once a year to book. Okay, you've got them once a year. Likely you don't have any cookies. They're not logging in when they're browsing, okay? Even the repeat visitors. And what's more is there's such an abundance of comparable sites that if they come to your site and don't find something quickly enough, they can very easily go to a competitor's site. Okay, it's not very sticky in that sense from a guest perspective. So you really want to make sure that they can find their properties very quickly. So what happens? They come to the Belle Villa landing page. Essentially, we know 3 things about them. Okay, they're not logged in. They haven't visited in probably 9 months. The only thing we know about them when they land is we know where they want to go in terms of a very large region, like southern France. We know when they want to go, arrival date and duration, and we know the occupancy that they're asking for. We know 3 things about this anonymous person, and now we've got to win that person's trust before they go to a competitor. Okay, and they're only going to come once a year. Okay, so what happens? They go ahead, they hit this orange button there, zoeken, which is Dutch for, those of you from the Netherlands know it's search, right? It's probably similar in other Germanic languages. And they get these results. Okay, look at the top here. 1,191 properties meet my criterion. How many am I showing on the page? Okay, so this is a bit of a recipe for disaster, right? Okay, I've got to retain this person. I've got to get their interest in and eventually have them book. But among all these 1,191 properties that Elasticsearch has returned to me, I've got to find the one which is most interesting to this client. Who's not logged in and only visits once a year. Okay, so you can start to understand the importance of the recommendation, and you can start to get an idea of what information I have to work with. So the only information I'm really going to have to work with now is the next few clicks that my user puts in. I know 3 things so far. Now I'm giving them a filter list on the left, right? So these are more query filters they're going to put in. I'm going to start finding out more about them, and I'm going to see what they do on the website. I'm going to see what they click on, and I'm going to see also the client-side information, which is possibly available to me, but I don't have it yet. Okay, this is potential data. You remember we talked about that matrix, and data was the third column, right? So this is where I'm starting to think, hey, if I need a recommender engine, the data available to me, the primary data is going to be the browsing data, and I need to get it right away and start working with it right away, because if I don't, if I wait for them to log in, if I wait for an overnight batch job, they may not be back, and they'll be at a competitor. Okay, so we started looking, how well are we doing so far? We started looking, we started getting hit level data from several weeks back and analyzing what search results have we returned and how has the conversion rate been on them. Now for something like this with infrequent high ticket purchases, essentially what you've got is very few conversion events. Okay, they're not purchasing, you know, groceries where they're coming back all the time. They're making one purchase a year. So your conversion events have to be things like click-through rate on search results, repeat item views, add to favorites, and eventually booking, right? But you've got to think of the micro conversions along the funnel. So we started looking at those, and we said, okay, here are some pictures. Let's see how well they did. So how many of these pictures that we returned in search results, we chose them as the 6 out of the 1,000, how many of them actually got clicked on? Not booked, just clicked on, like for more information, right? So look at this property in the middle, and this is one that stood out to us, okay? It looks like kind of a nice property. It's in southern France, but it's in the Alps, right? And we looked at it, and in the time period that we looked at, this one had been returned nearly 2,000 times in search queries. It had been selected about 2,000 times over the previous few weeks. And we started saying, okay, all the times we've returned it, how many times was it actually clicked on? Okay? Well, as it happened, do you know how many times we had to show this property before it was clicked on? 600. Close. 600 times before it was clicked on. And in all of those weeks, and all the thousands of times we returned this property, it was booked exactly 0 times. Okay? So we realized, okay, probably something needs to change in how we're doing the recommender engine, right? And probably this is actually translating into a very large amount of lost revenue. So we put it on. Under the customer journey stream, it was one of the things that went in. And from a business perspective, the business goal was guests quickly find properties that appeal to them. Okay? If you want to make it really flowery, you say guests fall in love with our properties, whatever, you know. And then we translate that into, you know, me as an analyst, I say, okay, that's a recommender engine, let's do it. And I know the data that's available, we've got the features, the booking history, the click stream, right? I probably should go into more detail about that, but I don't have a whole lot of time, but I'll touch on it a little bit later in terms of the actual data features. So we put that in there, and then we started this process over the next couple months where we said, okay, we want to recommend your engine, we've got specific challenges for our platform, we have 0 available resources, pretty much, right? There was me who was doing everything. Essentially, I was building up the program. So I was hiring people, doing strategy, doing road mapping, and when I had some time, I was actually doing Python coding, right? And then we were hiring. So we had to figure out how can we get a recommender engine in. So we started thinking of the technologies and the staffing, and over the course of several months, I talked to a lot of different vendors. Okay, I talked to software providers, and I talked to service providers, and considered different options for that. And what we finally landed on was the Neo4j system. Okay, we knew Neo4j was a big use case for it was a recommender engine. And for me, I've got a pretty extensive background in terms of network flows and modeling, and I knew that a lot of business problems could also be modeled as network flows, and then you could do cool things with them in terms of graph algorithms and such, right? So I was also kind of eager to model things as a graph. We got Rick in from Neo. Is Rick in here? No. So Rick, of course, showed us his famous beer graph. You guys know what I'm talking about? How many of you have seen Rick's beer graph? Okay. And that, of course, is enough to convince anyone, right? So we decided we wanted to go with Neo. And then the question was, you know, service provider, who's going to do this, right? And having spent a long time myself learning a lot of languages and such, I realized, hey, if you're not really sharp with a language, it's going to take you about 10 times as long, right? So we did quite a bit of interviewing people about that, and a lot of people were eager to get involved with the Neo4j project. I mean, for a lot of service providers, it's a really sexy project, and they want to build up experience. Most of them actually don't have experience when you probe. So what we actually ended up doing is we ended up going with GraphAware, and 2 guys from them came with us. And the reason we did that, this is not a plug for GraphAware, but the reason we did, I mean, I'm super happy with them, but the reason we went with them essentially is because we knew they had very solid experience in terms of what they'd built with recommenders and with some of the plugins and such. So that's kind of a key part of it. The fact that we were able to get that in 2 weeks was because of the choice of service providers. And I'm sure that if we'd chosen some of the other people I talked to, they would have done their best. But I'm also certain we wouldn't have gotten things done nearly as quickly. Anyways, so that's how we ended up then going with the Neo4j solution and going with GraphAware. And then what we did is we said, okay, we want to keep this agile. We want to think about how it's going to work and do something basic first, and then we'll scale it up later. So the sort of nail it then scale it philosophy for this. So in terms of how we're thinking of setting up the graph, essentially, like I said, all the different units were very different. So we had to do it in such a way that the content-based part would incorporate the features of the properties, the most relevant features, in the right way. Okay, so each property has dozens of features. Things like, does it have a dishwasher or not, right? But obviously, does it have a dishwasher or not is much, much less important than something like, is it in Italy or is it in Norway, right? Does it take pets is much more important than does it have a fireplace? And that's what we wanted to try and understand and put the proper weights on, okay? But all those features from the properties, we could feed them into the nodes to get the content-based recommendations. But what was also really interesting for us, because it was so key for us to get the clickstream data in, because we're depending on it, then we would put the clickstream data in as nodes and arcs in order to sort of build the collaborative filtering part. Okay, so that's sort of how it was modeled. And we talked to the guys at GraphAware, and they said, okay, we'll come in, we never really know what it's like, but we'll do a 2-week project, and we think we can get the basic system set up. You get the hardware in place. So we had a cloud provision for the servers and such. We think we'll get that done in 2 weeks, but it's a bit experimental. I'm like, okay, fine. Well, I know how these things work, right? I've been around a long time, and everything's always a bit of a risk, so we'll just take it like that. And the end goal, of course, is that we wanted to be able to have these properties appearing offline. So sort of as a little iframe or something in the search result page. That was sort of the initial goal, as opposed to interacting with Elasticsearch, or even streaming real time, which was our eventual goal. And this is what we're starting with. Just to let you know, we had Google Analytics already in place, and we just gone with Google Analytics Premium. So Google Analytics Premium, if you don't know what that does, is that'll give you the hit level data, and you can easily put it in Google BigQuery. So essentially, with Google Analytics Premium, leveraging the tags you have, your Google Analytics tag, you can get the hit level data, the clickstream data, but you're getting it a few hours later, and it's going into BigQuery. So we had that in place already. When you're looking at streaming data, okay, when you're looking at this sort of fast analytics, typically what happens if you want the client-side data is you're putting on some sort of JavaScript. That JavaScript, or like a pixel or something, right? That is going to send information immediately via like Kafka or RabbitMQ, some kind of message queue, immediately to your server. Your server will then process it in several milliseconds, and then you'll do what you want with it, right? So a lot of companies will sell you that JavaScript code, that pixel code. You can implement it. They'll put it in HDFS for you or whatever, right? So that's kind of a common solution. Whether or not you end up doing anything with that data is another question. And I think a lot of companies are building up data lakes with such a client-side solution and not doing anything with it. But that, of course, requires retagging and restructuring everything and then putting a new database repository in. So when we had these guys from GraphAware, and essentially what we started talking about is we're like, hey, we've got this Google Analytics in. The data's going straight at the hit level to the Google server. Maybe we can just bifurcate that call and essentially send it not only to Google, but send it straight to Neo4j. Okay, so that was a bit of an epiphany. And it turns out it's not hard to do. Okay, it's not hard to do that at all. If you got Google Analytics, you could just overwrite what's called the send hit task function, and it'll send your hit level data. So that's essentially everything you've already tagged, in this case in Google Analytics. So all the work has gone into it, all the business logic's gone into it. And then it will at the same time send it straight to whatever endpoint you have. Okay, so in this case we said let's go with RabbitMQ. I mean, it could have just as easily been Kafka or something. So yeah, so Christoph's like, yeah, I can do RabbitMQ, whatever. So he just spun it up for us. He rewrote the driver in PHP because our version was a little bit older, which was fine because he'd written the original driver anyway, so that was kind of convenient. And so that's how it sort of, what hadn't been scoped as a real-time streaming project, very quickly, within that 2 weeks, we turned it into this streaming real-time project. So then what we ended up with then is we had the Neo4j cluster, which we were feeding from the data warehouse. So all the property features and the purchases, right? So what customers, the customer attributes and what they'd purchased. We were feeding it from there. We could also feed it from BigQuery in terms of session level data, but that was with a delay. And then that would come back to the web server in the form of a recommendation. But then what we were able to do then with this bifurcation of the GA script was to send that straight to Rabbit and ingest that directly into Neo4j. Okay? So then what we had is we really, whereas we thought we were going to get a batch-oriented recommender, very quickly had this real-time solution. So that was nice. That was very nice. I mean, it was still the alpha version. There was a lot of optimization to go in it and such. And these things, of course, you always have to tune and do a lot of further analysis. But really then, with 2 weeks of effort, and essentially, it was these two guys. It was me putting in 3/4 time, and a web guy who was, maybe half a resource from the website. We were up and running with this, which was, I thought, pretty amazing. And what we realized, too, is that whereas the recommender was initially planning to be in a frame, then we could also very quickly incorporate it into the Elasticsearch. And, of course, there's a lot of, that's a whole huge issue. And if you saw the Airbnb presentation, they also talked about the plugin for Elasticsearch. So then we start doing that, which is even more value because now you're influencing your search results in addition to like a frame recommender. We also had APIs available so that customer service and marketing could hook into the recommendation, which is very convenient because what would happen is customers would come up and say, hey, I need to rebook. This house was canceled, whatever, can you rebook me? Customer service would be left saying, okay, we're not sure how to rebook you, what property to put you in. They could then hook into the recommender system using the REST API and say, here's your customer ID based on the recommender engine, here are the 10 properties that seem most appealing to you. When you go into marketing direct mails, obviously that's also very useful. So we found that having this, the recommender engine had a lot of additional possibilities to it, which was quite nice. And just kind of to give you an idea of how much faster this moved than I expected, this was sort of an update slide that I presented after, I'm not sure how far it was in, maybe 8 months or something, where we put the little, the green, red, yellow arrows. And the part on the right here was the part which included more of the recommender engine stuff. So what we'd scoped out as kind of being long-term vision for the recommender in terms of real time and such, we were already in the alpha stage of that by the end of those first 2 weeks, right? So that was really cool to be able to present that and say, look, we thought it would take us this long to get there, but it's actually only taken us much less time to get the initial results to that. Not a full-flown, optimized version, but showing the proof of concept and ready to be improved and developed further. So that was actually really cool. I was happy to do that. So that's my story. And feel free to contact me if you want, or catch me afterwards in one of the fikas, what are they called? The little Swedish, anyways, the coffee breaks. I'll be around most of the evening probably. And thanks for coming.